happened when actress Diane Keaton showed up for lunch, Oscar-winning actress of Annie Hall and the Godfather movies. She shows up for lunch with a regular, a guy who's there once a week. And this is her first time there, and her waitress is Glenda. And Glenda's a homegirl, been there, done that, tattooed, been to prison, felon, parolee. She doesn't know who Diane Keaton is. And so she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, well, what do you recommend? And Glenda rattles off the 3 platillos that she particularly likes. And Diane Keaton lands on the second one. That one sounds good. I'll have that second one you mentioned. And then suddenly something dawns on Glenda. She goes, wait a minute. I feel like I know you, like we've met somewhere. And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it humbly. Oh gosh, I suppose I have one of those faces, you know, that people think they've seen before. And then Glenda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. That just took my breath away. And I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings. But suddenly kinship so quickly, Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress, exactly what God had in mind. And if you'll permit me, this is what I think is on God's mind. It comes by way of Jesus, who says quite clearly, that you may be one. I suppose he could have been more self-referential, but he's not interested. It's about us, that you may be one. We have to aim high in the work that we've chosen to do. We cannot settle for the pragmatic and the stuff that we can easily achieve. And honest to God, if Gary Yates has taught us anything, it's to reach out for the things that maybe you can't reach. We aim high, we articulate something that's huge, and we participate in a larger love. And kinship is it, that you may be one. All of us are called to be what Alice Miller, the late great child psychologist, calls enlightened witnesses. People who, through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. We never hold the bar up and ask people to measure up. You just show up. And you hold the mirror up and you tell the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth and my truth is a gang member's truth, and it happens to be the same truth. And here's the truth, and I'm glad you're sitting down. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. Then you watch as people, especially on the margins, become that truth. They inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. But our task is to return people to the truth of who they are. Because I've written a book lately, and there's some universities that choose to force their students to read it, like the entire freshman class or that kind of thing, I feel obligated to go. So I went to Gonzaga University in Spokane. It also happens to be my alma mater, so I felt doubly obligated. So I brought 2 homies with me, Bobby and Mario, and they were going to help me with all the talks that we were invited to do. There was a main talk at night and then a lot of little talks during the day, classrooms and luncheons and meetings and such. And I've taken hundreds of homies with me to fly. Mario was the most paniqueado I've ever taken in my life. He was hyperventilating, fearful. And we were at Burbank, and at Burbank you get on the tarmac, and you have the stairs. And so we're sitting by the window, we're waiting for a flight. It's early in the morning, and our plane comes in, and they get off the plane, and Mario's getting in more panicky mode. And I noticed that their flight attendants are walking up the front steps with coffee, 2 large coffees, each one of them, and Mario goes, "When are we going to board the plane?" And I said, "Well, as soon as they sober up the pilot," and I pointed out the flight attendants with the coffee. I probably shouldn't have said that. tell you that Mario is one of the most tattooed people at Homeboy Industries, just thoroughly covered his face and sleeved out. But it was the first time I'd ever been out in public with him, and I was just astounded at how people treated him. People literally would move to another side of the, in the terminal, and mothers would vaguely sort of clutch their kids, and it was really quite eye-opening for me. We were on the plane, and even the flight attendants would sort of recoil every time they saw him. It was really quite physical. And I should tell you that Mario is one of the kindest, most gentlest gang members I've ever known. Angelic, really, though the packaging might suggest otherwise, I guess. But the flight attendant, would hand him peanuts, and he would take the peanuts, and as if this was the first time peanuts had ever been handed over to a passenger on a plane on Southwest, and he looks her in the eyes, and he takes the peanuts, and he doesn't just thank her. He says, "Thank you so much." It was kind of astounding to observe. And so we get to Spokane, and I said, "Look, I'm not going to give any of these talks. You're going to give them." And so classroom and luncheons and all those kinds of things. And they each got practice telling their story, a little snapshot of abandonment and abuse and rejection and violence, and awe came upon everyone. Then that night was the main talk, and there were 1,000 people packed into this hall. Standing room only, people sitting on the floor, in direct violation of the fire code. It was really quite packed, and so I gave my 45-minute thing, and then I had them come up, which they didn't know I was going to have them do, and they were, especially Mario, was quite shy, and they gave their little 5-minute snapshot, and then I wanted them to be part of the Q&A, and so I asked this woman, she was up in the front, "Yes, ma'am." "Yeah, I have a question for Mario." Well, Mario just gets a total panicky move, and he stands up to the microphone. "Yes." And the woman says, "You mentioned that you have 2 kids, a daughter and a son, and they're just on the verge of beginning their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart? What advice do you give them?" And Mario thought a long time, and he stood there, and he said, I don't. And then he starts to choke up. "I don't want my kids to turn out like me." And the woman shoots up, and she says, "Why wouldn't you want that? You are so kind, and you are so gentle. You are wise and compassionate and thoroughly good." Then she points at him, and she says, "I hope your kids turn out to be like you." And 1,000 people stood up, and they applauded, and they did not stop. And all Mario could do was to hold his face in his hands, so overwhelmed at the fact that 1,000 total perfect strangers had chosen to return him to himself. That you may be one. It's mutual. But there's nobody in this room that doesn't have the palpable experience of having to dismantle messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way. The great scripture scholar Marcus Borg says that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history, and certainly throughout scripture, is shame and disgrace. And so we have to kind of do our work and dismantle. I used to say I was in over 20 detention facilities where I would do services as a priest, and now it's been reduced to about 15. All the youth authorities have left us, at least in Southern California. And I go out and say masses out in the boondocks and camps, for example, a couple of them back to back, and then I have to race back to Dolores Mission because I've been there for 25 years. I get asked to do stuff. So my Saturdays always look the same. 1 o'clock baptism, 2 o'clock quinceañera, a 3 o'clock wedding, 4 o'clock exorcism. Just checking to see if you're still listening to me. So I've never done one of those, but I raced back this one day, and it was 20 minutes to 1, and so It was in the early days when our office was on First Street, so I said, well, I'm going to go check my mail. I have 20 minutes. So I went there, contento, feliz, all by myself, reading my mail. When all of a sudden this woman barges through the door, I find out her name is Lisa. She's 34 years old. This is the first time she's ever stepped foot in my office. Well, everybody's seen her around. She's kind of a street person, heroin addict, prostitute, gang member, tattooed, felon, parolee. She's something of a famous peleonera and a gritona. She's always screaming or fighting. You can hear her scream every day. She's being tossed out of the bar next door, screaming at the guy who tosses her out. You can hear her screaming into payphones on First Street, just let me stay tonight, pleading with family members or friends. And this is the very first time she's decided to step foot into my office. And now I notice that it's 6 minutes to 1 in my 1 o'clock baptism. She comes barreling through and plunks herself down, and she launches right in. I need help. Ooh, I've been to like 50 rehabs. I'm known all over nationwide. Went to Catholic schools all my life, she says. I graduated from elementary. I even graduated from Sacred Heart High School in Lincoln Heights. And then she gets quiet and still. And she says, in fact, first time I ever used heroin was right after I graduated. And I've been trying to stop since the moment I began. And I watched as she leaned her head against the wall behind her, and her eyes became like two ponds, water rising to meet its edges and spilling over. And she cried, until finally she leveled her eyes at me and she said with great deliberation, I am a disgrace. And suddenly her shame meets mine. Because when I had seen her step into my office that afternoon, I had mistaken her for an interruption. It's mutual. Nobody in this room has ever met a hopeful kid who joined a gang. It has never happened in the history of kids. It has never happened in the history of gangs. Hopeful kids don't join gangs.